Hello again. This is the second episode of the BigeyeCrappieMan and his catch.
And I'm Rod King, the Big Eye Crappy Man.
And I'm Robin King, his best catch. So, in our last episode, I mentioned that when we started dating, I had no clue what a bass or a crappie or any of those kind of fish were. And I certainly didn't know anything about fishing tournaments.
Well,
You fished in your first fishing tournament. That's hard to say. Your first tournament while we were dating, wasn't it like March or April?
hmm
There.
that's right. Well, as I said before, bass fishing was my first love of fishing. Bass fishing. I grew up bass fishing and brim fishing, and did very little crappie fishing. Um, and when we crappie fished, we usually fished in the fall. We didn't usually crappie fish in the spring. But I had a while I was in the service in the Marines, my dad became good friends with a taxidermist uh, named Bob Driver, and Bob Driver had his little taxidermy shop inside of a tackle shop right down there at the food beside the food line, uh, right there at Horton Road and Ladder Road. I mean Ladder Road and Duke Street or Roxborough Road, right there. And the name of that tackle store was Phil's Tackle Box. Phil McCarson ran that tackle store, owned and operated the tackle store. Well, uh, my daddy, knowing Bob Driver, he went in there all the time, and then I started visiting in there and getting some of my stuff for fishing in there, and met Phil and found out that he was going to have a crappie tournament up at Kerr Lake, Bugs Island.
I think one of those dates we went on, we went into Phil's tackle box.
They may
That was
have.
in a, I guess that was the preview of Bass Pro Shops that I would learn a lot about. All
Yeah,
right, sorry to
yeah.
interrupt you. Go ahead.
So um, that was kind of that transition from uh, not being a professional bass fisherman to just learning how to catch a crappie more and more. Well, Phil was going to have a tournament that year. It was April, and the first one, if I'm not mistaken, was the one at Kerr Lake, Bugs Island. And I said, well, I think I'm going to go try my hand at these crappie. I can't remember if I'd ever fished Kerr Lake for a crappie or not, but I can remember the night before I went over to my dad's house. That's where I kept my boat at under his shelter, and I told my daddy I'm going up there to Kerr Lake tomorrow to fish in this crappie tournament. And he said, "Where you putting in at, son?" I said, "I'm gonna put in up there where that tournament's headquartered at. I'm gonna put in up there at Henderson Point, and that's where they're having the tournament." And he said, "Well, let me tell you something. That's big water up there around that place." He said, "Now tomorrow they're calling for some bad weather up there." He said, "So whatever you do, son, do not cross that big old deep water up there by the dam. That's 100-foot water up there. You don't need to cross that, because going across there is one thing, coming back is another." And so I loaded up my boat, and I got up there to the tournament that morning and put my boat in there at Henderson Point, and first thing I did was go across that lake. It didn't look bad. It was in the morning. The wind was calm, and I went on across the lake and didn't catch a thing. And as I was over there, I started noticing how bad the weather was getting. In fact, it was a full blown nor'easter came in, and the wind was blowing right to Henderson Point from the dam, and it was making some serious swells out there. And I'm sitting back over there in the cove looking about and thinking about what my daddy had told me. Son, first thing you do is don't go across that big open water. And now, so I had this about a 16, 17-foot Astroglass bass boat that I'd bought and paid for while I was in the service. And I started making my way across that lake, and it was snowing, it was sleeting, the wind was blowing. I think my boat speared two or three of the swells. I would try to get up on a swell and ride that swell. And I'd come down and kind of spear a wave a little bit, and water would just hit me in the face. And I was heading straight to Henderson Point. I could see the house. I was heading straight towards it. And I just kept my focus on that place. And when I finally did, the Lord blessed me and I got across that open water. I drove my boat right up on the beach, got out, went inside this building, and I think this is the first time I'd ever met this man. He was sitting in a chair up there with a fire going inside the building. His name was Baird Edgerton. I walked in there, I had ice all over my mustache, and all that water that hit me in the face froze. And I met old Bear, and I just went in there and sat down and talked to him. And I was like, that was scary, man. He said, boy, I seen you coming across there. You lucky you made it across there. It was rough. I said, yes, sir. It was one of the roughest days I believe I've ever had on the water. Well, after about an hour or two of sitting on that by that fire and counting my blessings, I got back in my boat and just went back in a little old one of those creeks right there by the boat ramp and found an old laydown that was all the bark had come off of an old pine tree, and it was laying out there in the water, and man, it was so calm and quiet, and I just flipped 2 or 3 corks over there on the limbs of that tree, and I looked around and one of them was gone. I picked it up and I had one of the biggest crappies I'd ever caught, so I took it up there and weighed it in, and somebody caught one and beat that one, and then I went back to the same spot, fished a little bit more, and I caught another one bigger than that, and I took it and weighed it in, and it was a 2-day tournament, and on the second day, that fish would come in 3rd place in the first crappie tournament that I ever fished. So I was blessed, and I didn't have to go across that big open water like my dad told me to do. Right there, in a calm place, a little calm, still piece of water right there by the weigh-in was where I would do my best.
That reminds me of a verse in the Bible, Proverbs 1:8, that says, listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. That would have been one of those moments that would have been good to listen to your dad's instruction. And that it makes me remember or think about the ones that have gone on before us, the generation before us, how they've lived life and experienced life. And we do need to listen to their stories and their experiences and heed their instruction because they've been there. And God's word is our best instruction for life. And 2 Timothy 3:16 says, all scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness. So that should be our first place we go for instruction, is to his word. And he has an answer for everything we'll face in life in his word. But also thinking about your dad and the generation before us, they're the older saints, believers that are walking on this earth. And just as Paul told the Corinthians, imitate me as I imitate Christ, we need to be looking for those the senior saints that are walking a godly life on this earth and watch, how they do it, glean from their experiences, and imitate them as they imitate Christ. Don't disregard those that have come before you, gone before you, and their wisdom.
That's right. And
do you have a fishing tip for us today? Or
well, the fishing tip for today is, most people when I was growing up and even now, when you go to the lake and you fish for crappie and people will say, yeah, there's no need in going. When the dogwood blooms, that's when it's time to go crappie fishing. Well, I can tell you, if you wait till the dogwoods bloom, you done missed half the big crappie. Cause those crappie, they'll get into some 2 to 4 foot of water in the end of January and early February, depending on the weather cycle. So don't wait till the dogwoods bloom. You'll be catching some crappie, and a lot of them but they won't be that trophy crappie that you're looking for. Those big ones, they're in there long before those dogwoods bloom in some shallow water, and they'll be the big ones. They're the ones that are going to react to that sun getting higher in the sky and the days getting longer, and that old backwater starting to heat up, and those crappies know it, and they're making that move. And some of those biggest ones will be right in that shallow water long, long before those dogwoods bloom. And also wanted to share a little bit about that first date we went on. You know,
Don't tell anything I don't know. Oh, yeah.
That first date we went on, we went to my mom and daddy's house, you know, for my nephew's first birthday party. And all my family was there, like we said. But what we had to eat that night was beef ribs, cooked on the grill, barbecued. Unbelievable. Some best eating stuff you'll ever eat. Well, I took an old mall girl and showed her how to eat some beef ribs. You don't eat beef ribs with a fork or a knife. You eat them in your hand, and you gotta work on them things. Now, you ought to seen her with her new makeup on, called barbecue sauce. After that night,
And I still try to eat them with a fork. It's not my thing.
oh, man. We learned a lot about her that night, and she learned a lot about me and my family.
And I've learned a lot about fishing tournaments through the years. I've seen you get up out of that warm bed a lot of early mornings to go out and fish in the cold.
That's right. All right.
Well, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time for the Big Eye Crappie Man and his catch.
God bless you.